Whether they want to or not, Americans are facing a lot of hard truths about our country, aren't we? Particularly over the nation's ugly ties to slavery. On one level, you got Republicans saying, the Democrats, they're the ones who started all this slavery stuff. They were about it. We were always on the right side back in the day. Does that make it okay today that Republicans are so quiet about Trump ignoring BLM, seeming to plead the case for Confederate monuments? Now, for some in society, what do we do about the monuments? Some say, get rid of all the statues, all of them, all the founding fathers, get rid of all of them. All of them? You really think you're going to get buy-in with the majority of this country, saying we're going to get rid of all the founding fathers and replace them with indigenous peoples and other heroes that we choose today? Well, it is true. Most of the founding fathers, certainly too many, had connections to enslaving people. Or is all this monument talk a distraction from real changes that we need to have on the table? All good fodder for conversation for a new segment called These Truths, birthed by friend of show, Angela Rye. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, Chris.
So, the founding fathers, Trump in his July 4th speech accused protesters who tear down statues of wanting to wipe out history. Context.
Well, I dare not ever try to explain context for a Donald Trump speech. But what I can tell you for sure is that history has already been whited out. What we know is that erasure has existed for indigenous people, for Black people, and for all people of color. And I can tell you for certain in my history books, thank God for my parents who taught me from the very beginning about the power of my Blackness and the importance of it in our mark in history, dating before the transatlantic slave trade. And so when we talk about whiting out history, what has already happened is that there's been significant erasure from the beginning of time. So when you talk about these monuments and who American history has chosen to lift up as our heroes, what is the truth, Chris, is that some of these people are history makers, but they're no heroes of mine, right? And because they're history makers, the question is, do they belong in a book? Do they belong in a museum? Or should they be celebrated, commemorated, and memorialized in a statue? And I think that there's a big difference there.
I hear you. But this is also going to be a very formative principle of how you get a majority for change in this country. Rushmore, where he gave the speech. You know who's on Mount Rushmore. The suggestion of, hey, they all have to come down. Forget about Washington, Jefferson, forget about Teddy Roosevelt, forget about Lincoln. They all got to go. They're all wrong for one reason. Even Lincoln. He did the Emancipation Proclamation, but he didn't think blacks were equal socially. He didn't want them around the house that way. They all got to go. You think you're going to get buy-in in America for any kind of formative change if you start there?
Well, and that's exactly the question. So often, whether we're talking about on cable news or we're talking about the debates that exist in the halls of Congress, we start at the argument without starting at the same foundational principle just around education. And so if we start from the same educational point, which could very well be, did you know that George Washington was not only a slave owner, but one who believed that he was worthy of the very teeth that were in his slaves' mouths? Is that someone who you want to commemorate on the dollar bill, with a statue, with a holiday, and on Mount Rushmore?
Yes,
right? Is that
is going to be what you get from 85% of Americans. Because they're going to say what he did was wrong, but he was also the father of the country. And you have to see your history in the context of where the people were then. They were highly imperfect. This is an experiment. But if you hold everybody to that kind of standard, you'll have nobody. And then I don't think you'll have any buy-in on something that is, as we both know very well, the minority of this country cannot change what's wrong by itself. You need the majority to buy in. That's a big obstacle to getting, white Americans, but non-white Americans also, to say we got to remake all our heroes in America.
But I do believe that should be the charge. I do believe that if right now we're in a society that has, just for example, talking about R. Kelly, right? R. Kelly has been canceled, right? Given this new term that exists on social media because of his predatory relationship with underage women. Rightfully so. You know who else had a predatory relationship with underage women?
Thomas Jefferson.
I give you Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. Exactly. And so the question is, Should we be celebrating and commemorating people who were that treacherous to whole groups of humans in this country? And I would argue no. So if 41 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence could talk about these truths that they hold as self-evident and then go to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but there's a large footnote. I wasn't considered human to them. So much so that a Dred Scott decision said so. So much so that we had to wait several years after the Declaration of Independence for the Emancipation Proclamation to even be signed. And I think that we have to have those types of grounding conversations. And Chris, maybe it is that people will say, they're still my founding fathers. That alone, the patriarchal sentiment that exists in that, I think also has to be reframed. Why aren't there any Black women heroes on Mount Rushmore? We can't even get Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill after it being agreed to in the Obama administration. We're not talking about the indigenous people whose land was stolen right from beneath their feet. Sitting Bull should be on Mount Rushmore. Crispus Attucks, who was fighting in the American Revolution before he was even deemed human, should be on Mount Rushmore. Frederick Douglass, who really shaped the way Abraham Lincoln thought about...
The line was, these are great presidents. And
and I think, I hear you. I think what I would say is maybe they were great presidents to someone, but who we really should be commemorating are the people behind the great presidents, the people who pushed them to their limits, the people who had them reframe their thinking. That is what I believe this is about. And the truth of the matter is, this country is built on a lot that's not good. And we're in this time that is allowing us to reset and really think about what is right, what is true, and how we should go forward. There's so much that we were taught in history books that is not accurate, right? And I don't think that we should hold up heroes or deem them heroes because it makes us feel better. That is not honest. And
I think that where you wind up is, as long as we don't let ourselves be consumed with this conversation, you're right, we have to have the right operating premise. But, changing who's on Mount Rushmore will help in some way. I think you'd have to add. I think if you do addition by subtraction, I think you're going to have problems. But I think if you add to our understanding of our collective history and who was positive and who wasn't, and change your education, make it more fulsome, make it more honest and transparent about people, flaws and all, that's a good sign. But we will continue this conversation because the idea of these truths is what we're playing with in Angela and I's conversations we'll keep having on the show, is what is true and what isn't. A lot of it is on perspective. End word to you.
It is, and I would just tell you that some aspects of what we're talking about in truth means it may hurt a little bit, but it's still right. And if it's right, how do we pursue the fullness of the righteousness of this conversation? And the part of it is, until we do some policy shifts, engaging in some major policy change to go along with this symbolism that is also very meaningful, we're going to be right here talking about the subtraction versus addition, because it's not just about the symbolism.
But that's something everyone must agree on. We can't stay where we are. Things cannot stay the way they are. How do we move forward? That's a tough question. These conversations will help. I know there are people out there who aren't going to like what Angela says. That's on her. I know you're not going to like what I say. I'm going to test these propositions because that's how we have the conversation. So all love and respect between me and Angela. You should apply the same to your discernment of what's said in the segment. We'll see how we do, and we'll keep doing it. Angela, God bless. Take care.
Thank you, Chris.